A groundbreaking new study has found that in Australia, in certain migrant communities, more boys are being born than girls. Now, this is an appalling form of discrimination, the very worst kind. It's not even sexual harassment or the gender pay gap or the unequal burden of household labour. This is the literal killing of girls just because they're girls. It's so bad, but why are all the feminists so quiet? And that's today on The Dr. Jo Show. Before we get into the show today, can I please ask that if you are new here, you hit the subscribe button and join our movement. The more people that watch the channel, the more it grows. And thank you so much for all of you guys who have been on this journey with me. So today we're talking about sex-selective abortion and a groundbreaking new study that conclusively proves that this is happening in Australia. The pro-abortion side has tried to deny it for many years, since about 2019 when this reared its head that this was an issue and people were raising it. They gaslit us for about 5 or 6 years just saying, no, this isn't a thing, no one would do it, it's definitely not happening. And now we really do have conclusive proof. We had proof along the way, but this new study really definitively shows it once for all, and we're going to go through that in this episode. But as we launch into this, I think it's really important to reflect on where we're at on the conversation on gender in Australia, because it seems like ever since Peter Dutton lost the last election, the Liberal Party has been obsessed with a discussion on quotas, as if having more women in the party via a system of quotas, the way the Labor Party does, will be what saves the Liberal Party. Let's watch.
It was women's groups, women's voices and women's energy that helped shape the Liberal Party. The Australian Women's National League, as well as many other prominent women's organisations, were central to the formation of our party. We must be a Liberal Party that is proudly for women and made up of women. Our party must pre-select more women in winnable seats so that we see more Liberal women in federal parliament. Now, I'm agnostic on specific methods to make it happen, but I am a zealot that it actually does happen.
So this is Susan Ley, the woman that really should just be in the Labor Party or the Greens, given that she's a lefty, but she's in the Liberal Party, and unfortunately she is the leader. She's symptomatic of the rot that currently exists in the Liberal Party and that needs to change if that party's ever going to win government and not just be Labor light. She's apparently a zealot about quotas. And in fact, all of these, lefty Liberal women who have been banging on about this, which is just privileged women who are mediocre, navel-gazing on an issue that ordinary Australian women really don't care about. And it's not just the Liberals who do all of this navel-gazing around the issue of gender, banging on about how progressive and feminist they are, to a media that just laps it up because it just suits their narrative and their worldview. They're all in their own echo chamber. It's Labor as well. Labor has cornered the market on being the party of the feminist, in inverted commas. Just this week even the Minns government, through the New South Wales Education Department, has just announced its gender equity plan where 80% of teachers are female. Minns has also written gender equity into its own Industrial Relations Act this week, where 65% of its employees need to be female. So all of this virtue signalling around women, and yet when a groundbreaking study looking at over 2 million births in Australia over a very long period of time, when it finds that in certain ethnic communities in Australia, the study looked particularly at New South Wales and WA, it found that girls are being killed just because they're girls. And what did we hear from Susan Ley to Anthony Albanese to Chris Minns to all these so-called feminists, Penny Wong, Claire O'Neill, Jed Kearney? Nothing. We heard nothing. Susan Ley might be a zealot about women in the Liberal Party, but she's completely oblivious and couldn't care less about the killing of girls in the womb just because they're girls. Kudos to The Australian, who did actually publish an article on this study, and then to news.com.au, who also published an article the day after. Other than that, this is an issue that has been completely ignored by the mainstream media. Yet any slightest infringement on any other aspect to do with women, that is always front page news. If it suits the narrative that women are oppressed and being disadvantaged because they're women, they've got this glass ceiling. Everyone from Hannah Ferguson to the cronies at Fair Agenda or Women's Agenda, all of those feminist, so-called feminist groups, they will release press releases. They'll be doing summits and talks, and you can't shut them up. You literally can't shut them up. Feminists are known not for being quiet, but for being noisy. But when you get a study like this that goes against their narrative, then they just don't want to talk about it. They don't say anything at all. And so this is a study that researchers at Edith Cowan University have done, and it was published in the Journal of Global Public Health. And what the researchers have said is that it almost certainly points to women from countries where a higher value is placed upon being a boy terminating a girl after discovering the gender through blood tests early in pregnancy. And they write that Indian and Chinese mothers have had a much higher induced abortion rate in early pregnancy than their Australian counterparts, which has coincided with the introduction of early prenatal testing. And they conclude this study provides the most compelling observational evidence to date of male-based sex ratio at birth amongst overseas-born mothers, which appears to be attributed to prenatal sex determination following a sex-selective abortion. So this is a study where it was an observational data analysis. So it's not a qualitative piece of research where there are interviews or focus groups. There's no self-selection bias in terms of, people who have a vested interest in that study outcome participating in the study. This was just looking at raw data of over 2.1 million births in WA and New South Wales between 1994 and 2015. So it's a longitudinal study over a long period of time. They've assessed millions of births. It found that with Australian-born mothers, so women that were born in Australia and got pregnant, the ratio of boys to girls was about 105 boys being born to about 100 girls. And that is what would be the naturally occurring ratio. That's within what you would expect to see if there's no other interventions. However, for Chinese mothers, it's 133 boys being born to 100 girls. And for Indian-born mothers, it's 132 boys being born to 100 girls. So this is a vastly skewed ratio, which suggests that something else is going on. So how is this happening and why has there been an increase? Well, traditionally, ultrasound was the way that we would find out if a baby was a boy or a girl. And the ultrasound that does that is at 20 weeks. So that's that big scan at 20 weeks where they will also do tests to see what abnormalities the baby has, what congenital potential issues, and they can also tell you the gender at that scan if you want to find out the gender, which a lot of people do. Prior to the introduction of the NIPT test, which happened in the sort of early 2000s, you could only find out gender by 20 weeks, at which point most people feel really uncomfortable with the idea of abortion because at that point a woman has grown this baby for 20 weeks. She's felt that baby's responded to her, she's bonded with that baby, she's seeing that baby on ultrasound scan, and when you look at what that looks like and you're thinking about abortion, it's clearly killing your baby that you can see. And the method of abortion at that stage is either to rip off the arms and legs of that baby and then to crush the skull as the final step. So they dismember this baby while this baby is conscious and alive, and then they extract that baby out piece by piece. Or they inject that baby with potassium chloride or digoxin into the baby's heart and then deliver that baby dead. So either method of late-term abortion is really gruesome. And although some gender-selective abortions certainly happen after the ultrasound, in fact, Dr. Mark Hobart, who I interviewed on my channel, and you can check it out, he speaks about a Sikh couple that came to him for an abortion at 19 weeks. They'd just done the scan and they came straight from the scan. And he talks about in that interview how when they were requesting the abortion, it wasn't the woman that was requesting it. It was a husband who did all the talking and said, we have to have an abortion. And Dr. Mark Hobart refused to sign off on that, but they went to Marie Stopes down the road and they got a sex-selective abortion. And Mark Hobart was then, hauled before the medical board and had an investigation that lasted for many months, all because he refused to sign off an abortion where the couple wanted to kill the baby or the husband wanted to kill the baby because the baby was a girl. So, we know that there are couples that will do a sex-selective abortion at 19, 20, 21 weeks, which is just mind-bogglingly gruesome. But the reality is an abortion, as I tell you all the time on this channel, when you're doing it at 9 or 10 weeks, you're not you're not off the hook morally or ethically. You are still killing your child, and objectively you are doing exactly the same thing that you're doing at 19, 20 or 30 weeks. You are killing your baby. And what's happened though is you can now pay for a blood test at 9 to 10 weeks. It's called a NIPT test. It's done, well, they tell you it's done because of chromosomal abnormalities, but also to show parents what the gender of their child is going to be. The NIPT test isn't funded by Medicare, and it will put parents out of pocket about $400 for getting it at about that 9-10 week mark. And what the study's authors say is that the significant increase in boys being born versus girls in certain ethnic communities, they say that this coincided with the rollout and the widespread availability of the NIPT test from 2010. So there seems to be a clear correlation between being able to test for gender and this now very skewed ratio that's occurring. What's important about this study is that it conclusively proves that sex-selective abortion is a problem in Australia. Now, we've had lots of indications that this is the case. It's a global problem. There's about 100 million girls missing worldwide. India will have, 5 million fewer women by 2030 because of sex-selective abortion. This is clearly an issue in terms of a lot of the countries that Australia pulls from for its immigrant population. This is an issue. But feminists and the pro-abortion side have been arguing till they're blue in the face that it's not. They're so keen to protect women and girls everywhere. Abortion is a woman's right. They put that above the fact that it's being used to kill girls systematically because of their gender. And so, in 2019, when Tanya Davies, who's a Liberal MP, wonderful woman, who really spoke up for this issue and spoke up for girls and was trying to introduce a ban on sex-selective abortion in New South Wales, the feminists lined up to say, there's no evidence, we don't know that it's happening, this is just a scare campaign. In fact, Claire Pullen, who is the chair of Our Body, Our Choices, she told The Guardian at the time that there's no evidence gender-selective abortion is taking place in Australia. She said that asking doctors to assess whether an abortion was being performed on the basis of gender on those grounds would essentially require them to undertake racial stereotyping. Well, you know what? I think we probably need some racial stereotyping in order to protect little girls from certain ethnic communities. I mean, I grew up, from an Indian background, and in my extended family, there's certainly a view that my brother was worth more because he was a boy. Like my grandmother definitely treated him better because he was a boy. There was a view that the boys should have better education than the girls. The girls are just going to get married. It was sort of the perspective. We don't need to invest in them. That was just in my own little microcosm. I certainly didn't get that from my mum, but it was there in the family kind of background, and you can see it in these stats that this is clearly a problem for ethnic communities in Australia. The study didn't just look at India and China. They also looked at the Philippines, they looked at Vietnam, they looked at other South Asian countries, and it's really clear that there's a skewed ratio which isn't there for women who are born in Australia, England, Canada or New Zealand. So this is a cultural problem. We have to actually be upfront about it. If we're going to protect these girls, we have to acknowledge, we can't just hide behind political correctness and say that, this has nothing to do with race or culture or ethnicity. It has everything to do with that. In certain migrant communities, there's an archaic patriarchal attitude that being a girl is worse, that giving birth to a girl is worse, that it's better to have boys. And, if we're going to stop that and change that, then one of the things we've got to do is say that this is not acceptable in Australia, that this is not something that we're prepared to accept in Australia. We might have abortion up to birth for any reason, but this is one reason which is just so blatantly discriminatory that it just cannot be allowed. Now, it's not just Claire Pullen from the abortion advocacy side of things. It's also these so-called academic experts and researchers who have also lended their academic credibility to advance the lie that this is not an issue in Australia. So, for example, the Human Rights Law Centre, which comes out of the University of New South Wales, they have said there's no evidence to support a ban and that sex-selective abortion bans do nothing about societal attitudes and structures that see women discriminated against in many facets of their lives. Instead, social and economic policy responses are needed to tackle gender discrimination in all its forms. For example, measures to eliminate gendered wealth inequality and family violence. I mean, you just couldn't make this stuff up. These so-called feminists who are like, we need social and economic policies to deal with, wage inequality and family violence, but killing babies just because they're girls, like just on account of their gender. The very worst thing you can do to a girl is to kill her on account of her gender. Like there's other other bad things you can do that we should be addressing through policy as well. But the very worst thing, these guys are like, oh, well, no, we shouldn't ban that. You know, that wouldn't be very effective. They can't get past their pro-abortion ideology. They're so obsessed with abortion. They are so determined that it is fundamental for women that they can't even acknowledge that killing girls on the basis of their gender is a bad thing. And they would never use these arguments about domestic violence. Like, they would never say, well, because it's happening behind closed doors, we can't regulate it, we can't see it, we can't properly police what's going on, and therefore, you know, a ban would be ineffective. That's not the argument they would make. They would say domestic violence hurts women, it's violence against women, therefore it needs to be banned, it needs to be illegal, irrespective of how difficult it might be to enforce and the effectiveness of a ban. They would still argue that you've got to do everything you can to stop domestic violence. That should be the same for actual killing, the annihilation of girls. And the South Australian Law Reform Institute, which is a research organisation within the University of Adelaide, so it's well known to me, they produced a report commissioned by a pro-abortion Attorney General who wanted to introduce abortion up to birth for any reason. They were commissioned to do a report, and in that they looked at whether this issue of sex selection was a problem, and they concluded that they would recommend against a prohibition on sex-selective abortion because it would be unenforceable and was also unnecessary, noting that whatever may be the situation overseas, there appears little, if any, evidence that abortions purely on the basis of gender are a real issue in Australia. So they are saying there's very little evidence this is even a problem in Australia. Never mind the fact that at the time they wrote that report, there had been an increasing amount of evidence that this is a problem. Not just the fact that it's a problem worldwide, but actual Australian evidence which proved that there's some real problems with the sex birth ratio in certain ethnic communities. So, for example, La Trobe University researchers had done a study in 2018 and 2021. Both of those studies indicated that more boys are being born to girls. One of those La Trobe studies found 125 boys are being born to 100 girls. SBS did an investigation in 2015. It also found a skewed ratio, and they interviewed doctors, and they even interviewed a migrant woman who didn't want to give her name, but she talked about the pressure that she'd been under from her family unit to kill her baby because her baby was a girl. So there was already evidence in the Australian context to indicate that this was a problem, but the experts at the South Australian Law Reform Institute said, oh, no, it's not an issue, there's very little evidence. Now we conclusively have a study of over 2 million births that shows that this definitely is an issue. Is the Human Rights Law Centre, is Salary going to come forward and say, oh, okay, we made a mistake. We obviously need to do something about this. Well, they haven't. It's been over a week and nobody has said anything. So there's something interesting to observe here. The abortion industry and their proponents in academia and the media, they're always claiming to be on the side of women, to be so pro-women. That's why they're so passionate about abortion. But when a study comes out that clearly shows that abortion is being used to kill baby girls on account of their gender, it really exposes the fact that these people aren't on the side of women because they say nothing. If they really cared about girls, if they cared about girls more than they love abortion, then they would speak up about this right now. So all of this to say, what can we do? Well, in South Australia in 2021, we did manage to pass a ban on sex-selective abortion. It's the only place in the country where there is a provision that says that this is not acceptable. And so, Section 12 of the Termination of Pregnancy Act says that a registered health practitioner must not perform a termination of a pregnancy for the purposes of sex selection. Now, you might say that's going to be difficult to enforce. How does it really change things? But law has a normative effect. It sends a message that this is unacceptable. It also, I think, communicates to health practitioners, to doctors, that if they're getting a sense that this is the reason, and some people are upfront about it, as we know from the doctors that have spoken up about when this has come to them, it gives doctors that freedom to just turn around and say, no, this is not something that I can sign off on. But it also forces doctors to be aware of their responsibilities on this issue. It means there isn't carte blanche abortion up to birth for any reason. There's a clear carve-out that aborting on the grounds of gender is not acceptable. Another reform that could be considered is to not allow gender reveal as part of the NIPT test, to only permit the reveal of chromosomal abnormalities, medical reasons, but not gender at the NIPT test at 9 weeks. And that's actually what the Edith Cowan researchers suggest in their study. So all of this to say, this is an issue in Australia. It's something that urgently needs to be addressed. John Ruddock from the Libertarian Party, who I hope to have on the channel soon, he has indicated that he's going to introduce a bill to ban sex-selective abortions in New South Wales. Given John Ruddock's intention to introduce a ban on sex-selective abortion in New South Wales, and given now this incontrovertible evidence that this is a problem Australia-wide, I am launching a new campaign, which I would love your help if you can jump onto the petition link below and also to circulate it amongst your networks. It's a ban on sex-selective abortion Australia-wide. And so I'm just calling on Australians to sign that petition to show that there really is lots of interest in this issue, that we as a community recognise that in Australia, and when you come to Australia, you become Australian. So no matter what your original background is, we accept Australian values. And in this country, we have a value that girls are not discriminated against or killed because they're girls, and that there's a fundamental equality between the genders that exist here, and that abortion on sex-selective grounds has to be decried at all costs. So please sign the petition link and spread it far and wide. But just as we draw this episode to a close, I wanted to let you guys know that I am going to go on a 2-week holiday now. I'm going to take a break from this channel just for 2 weeks. The kids are on school holidays, and I wanted to be able to just spend that time with them and not have to think or worry about filming the show and getting it done. So I'll be back in 2 weeks. But until then, have a great July, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Dr. Jo Show.